Hi everybody, FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos here for ChessLecture.com, and today we're going to take a look at a really interesting game between Jan Nepomniachtchi of Russia and Li Chao of China, a couple of 2700s. Nepo in particular is a good, solid, mid to upper 2700 guy. His opponent, a little bit lower rated, but still, 2700 is great, no matter whether you're a high 2700 or a low 2700 player. If you're there, I was going to say you've got it made in chess, but there actually is a fairly significant income disparity between the guys who are at the upper end of the 2700s and the lower end, but still, you're an amazing player regardless. Anyway, this was played, as I said earlier this year, in the Sharjah Grand Prix, and one of the cool things about Nepomniachtchi's chess is that he's always finding some really just amazing opening ideas, really just very creative, very surprising opening ideas. And this game is going to demonstrate one of them. So this is really, I think, mostly a triumph of preparation, but it's just beautiful, so it's worth seeing in any case. All right, so e4, b5, knight f3, and while most of the top grandmaster world has, of course, been playing the Berlin as their drawing weapon of choice for quite some time, in China, they've stuck to the Petroff. So, those of you guys who were Petroff haters, which is a lot of people until recently. So nowadays, like the Berlin makes people kind of long for the good old days where the Petroff was the opening of choice. And of course, nowadays, the main anti-Berlin is the Italian game where people are castling, playing d3 and a4. And that generally has not been the most exciting thing either. So the Petroff positions are kind of surprisingly fresh by comparison nowadays. Now, this is also kind of an interesting game because in this position, everybody's been playing knight c3 for a long time, and really with good results too. So it's not that, this has also been something that's kind of scared black away from the Petroff a bit. But white has done really pretty well with knight to c3 for quite some time. But, these things go in cycles, and computers get stronger, and new ideas start to show up, and there's a new batch of ideas with d4 out there waiting to be demonstrated. So d5, bishop d3, and of course this is a very important kind of parting of the ways here. So black often plays knight c6 or bishop to e7 here, but bishop to d6 is an important, well-known line also. So lots of options here every step of the way. Okay, so from here, almost everyone castles first and then plays c4. Some people play c4 here, but this is, well, I'm not sure what to think about it. It used to be considered a bit inaccurate because black would then flick in bishop to b4 check. But people have been playing this, again, off and on, and of course these are strong players who are playing it. So you expect they've got some fiendish idea in mind. So I'm not sure if it really is, all that fiendish or not. But anyway, there's a famous old game. I think it's either Marshall-Janowski or it's Janowski-Marshall, which is a really pretty game, won by black in just beautiful style. It probably was Janowski-Marshall. I suspect that game went a long way towards scaring people away from playing c4 first. But at least in the recent games, black has been playing c6 rather than bishop to b4 check, and then just transposing after castles. All right, in this game, the standard move order was chosen, the move order that I would recommend, frankly. And here, knight c3 is kind of the old standard, but there are other moves that are being played here. Caruana has played this a couple of times recently, in June of 2017, which is at least fairly recently as of this recording. And in both of those games, against Sergei Karyakin and Maxime Bashir-Legrave, the games went rook e1, bishop f5, queen to b3, queen d7, and only now knight to c3, and takes and takes and so on. So that is, or actually not takes, sorry, that's just blundering a piece, but of course bishop f5 first, queen f5, and then you can take back, or you can even play queen b7. So this is also a rather interesting little pathway. So as I said, new ideas are being discovered in this opening all the time, and that's typical. So at a certain point, people get sick of just looking at the Berlin and even anti-Berlins and all the rest of it, and go back to the old things that people used to avoid, and new ideas get discovered. So that's chess. Anyway, what's interesting is that in this game, a very old move was played, kind of the standard, used to be automatic move. So knight c3, bc3, dc, bishop c4. Okay, so here we have a place where there's a definite fork in the road for black. So the two main moves, well, the main move overall still, I think, by a pretty substantial margin, although maybe not anymore, is bishop to g4. So this was Old Faithful here, and there's just tons and tons of theory on this move. Another move that was pretty popular is knight to d7, or at least it's had its moments of popularity. I think here, nowadays it's not particularly popular, but Joblava played it in a game last year against Anand and drew. It might have been a blitz game. Let me actually check for you real fast. No, it was actually a slow game. So knight to d7 makes sense to bring the knight to f6, covering up the king side as quickly as possible. But another move that's become very popular is bishop to f5. So this has been played by Li Chao, by Sebastian Wagner, by Nisipianu, and by some other strong players as well. So again, people find new ideas, and this is one of the newer sorts of moves. So bishop to g4 makes good sense, pinning the knight, but the bishop's good on f5 too. So it's centralized. It protects h7. It might go back to g6 and help defend this guy. It also stops white from playing rook to b1, so that's another good point. And it also takes over the diagonals. There's no queen d3 or bishop to d3 to worry about either. So it's very logical. Is there a drawback to the move? Well, yes, and we'll see. Now, there have been, or I should say, Li Chao had a couple of games with this, played roughly around the same time in the same event. So Maxime Vischer-Legrand played knight to e5 against him and won, but not necessarily because this was the end of the world. And Li Chao was willing to repeat the variation. So 6 days after the loss to MVL, we have this game. And here, Nepo comes up with something cool. So he plays bishop to g5, kind of a natural move, kicking the queen. Queen goes to c7, which is pretty much what, well, some games queen a5 was played, but queen to c7 was the usual move. Okay, white plays rook to e1, just developing a piece, and black plays h6. So this had been played before as well. And in the earlier games, white played bishop to h4. There's one game in the database that seems to say a4, but that's clearly wrong. So bishop h4 was the obvious move. The bishop goes to g3. It'll neutralize the bishop on d6. And then white would like to play knight to e5. So all very logical, but black is more or less okay there. But Nepomniachtchi found, again, a fantastic idea here. So he goes knight to h4. So this is part one. All right. Well, here taking would not be so attractive because the knight comes to f5, queen's going to come to g4 or h5. This looks pretty good for white and pretty easy. Also, with the queen on h5, rook e1, e3, h3 would be a problem. Also, queen to g6 would be a problem. So a lot of reasons not to do that. Black needs that light squared bishop to stay alive. So he plays bishop to h7. And the question is, well, now what? Now bishop h2 is threatened, as well as obviously h takes g5. And white can't stop both those threats. I mean, if you retreat the bishop, bishop h2, check, followed by bishop to f4, looks just like free material for black. So what is white to do? Well, we're about to find out. The answer is bishop takes h6. Now, if there was a queen backing the bishop up, we would say, sure, I get that, but there's no queen backing it up. What is going on here? Well, this works, amazingly enough. So how does it work? Well, let's see. If g takes h6, which was not played in the game, we go queen to g4 check, king h8, of course, knight f5, and we're threatening mate on g7. Okay, what does black do? Well, if you go f6, the problem, if nothing else, is rook to e7. So a little interference there with queen g7. If you play rook to g8, well, you might want to give yourself a small quiz here. white to move and win? The answer, nice little tactical trick, rook e8. Pinning the rook, and if rook e8, queen g7 is mate, and if black does nothing, queen g7 will be mate. And if bishop f5, then queen g8 is mate. So that's the problem with that one. So bishop f5, of course, is what would be played, queen f5. And now the issue is, what do you do about bishop to d3 followed by queen to h7? So let's take a look. What are the possibilities? If you go f6, then rook e6, threatening to take on f6, knight to d7, and we just pile up. Rook a to e1. Now the threat is to go rook e7, queen to h7 mate. So knight to b6, bishop d3, let's say rook a to d8, and rook e7, and that's that. So sooner or later, black will have to take with the bishop, and when he does, queen h7 is mate. So that takes care of f6. No happiness for black there. If black goes knight to d7, well, bishop d3, right? Knight f6, queen f6. No help there. And if you go bishop h2 check, this is actually your only try, the only move that possibly saves him. So bishop h2, king h1, and queen f4. So it's important to get that in before white plays bishop to d3. So here, that's the good news. He avoids the mate. The bad news is the bishop on h2 is now trapped, so white gets the piece back. And after, let's say, something like knight to d7, queen h2, takes and takes, material is equal, but white's got the better structure, a little bit better minor piece, and he's slightly better. So this is the best black can do. And it's not that bad. I mean, it's only a slight disadvantage, but still, it's not going to be pleasant. It's by no means, let's say, a nearly automatic draw. Black is going to have to really work here. But it may be that it should objectively still be a draw. Okay, so let's get back to the game. This did not happen. Instead, black played bishop takes h2 check right away. White played king h1, and now black had to play g takes h6, and then transpose to the line we looked at a moment ago. King over, knight f5, takes, queen f4, and we already saw this, queen h5, or sorry, not queen h5, but queen h3, and knight to d7, takes, and with a better endgame, but the game goes on. So instead of this, Li Chao played bishop to f4, which makes some sense. So he's not collecting the piece, and he's taking the pawn, so material is equal, and he's probably expecting that bishop f4, queen f4 will occur, and he's all right there. Life is not so bad. But Nepo is ready for this one too. He plays bishop takes g7, another great move here. So more unpleasant surprises for the unfortunate Li Chao. So king g7 is now forced. I mean, if you don't take the bishop, then it's just a monster extra pawn for white, plus queen g4 is coming. So king takes g7 is clearly forced, queen g4 check. All right, so what now? Black has choice between a couple of reasonable possibilities. He could play bishop to g6, or he could just tuck the king away on h8. If he goes to g6, then one good move is rook to e4. And if bishop to d6, then knight f5 check is not going to work out well for black at all. And if he goes bishop to d2, it's kind of similar, actually. So bishop d2, knight f5. And the problem is that king to f6 is met very unpleasantly from black's point of view by f4 with the simple threat of queen to g5 mate. And queen to g5 is still mate, even if black plays bishop takes f5. So bad news there, folks, if you're a Petroff fan, if you get to this position. So bishop to g6 is not going to save black. So he goes king to h8, tucking the king away, but now knight f5. And again, the same tactical tricks that we saw before are once again in play. If the rook goes to g8, then once again, rook to e8 is a killer with the threat of queen to g7 mate. And so in the game, bishop f5 is played, but again, queen f5 with the threat of bishop to d3. And the problem for black here is that there's no check on h2 to give him the tempo he needs to play queen f4, so he just can't get to defend speedily enough. But he probably felt that queen to d6 might be okay. So now g3, bishop h6, king to g2. So now white's going to go rook h1, bishop d3, and the threat, or one of the threats, is to then go rook h6, bring the second rook over, collect the queen, and then still have a mating attack with the queen and the bishop. So black, for instance, could try knight to d7, but won't get there in time. Rook h1. If he goes king to g7, makes sense, but rook h4 is strong. So we're threatening rook to g4 check, and we're threatening rook a to h1, and black, once again, just doesn't have the time to cover everything in the position. So this is a winner. And if you go knight f6, if I'm calculating correctly, we can just do this. Rook h6, king h6, rook h1, king g7, and queen to g5 mate. So just never works for black. In the game, instead of knight to d7, he tried b5. Of course, the problem for white is he wants to go bishop to d3 without allowing queen to d5 check, trading queens. So bishop to b3 was forced, and now queen to g6. And here too, you know, I could very easily expect that Li Chao had calculated this a ways back and thought, hey, my problems are over. If white doesn't trade queens, I play king g7, and if need be rook h8, knight to d7, and I'm fine. I'm a piece for a pawn. And if he does trade queens, well, then life's really good because rook h1, king g7, no big deal. But again, Nepo is ready for him. So he trades and plays not rook to h1, but rook e7. So now there's no king to g7. There's no king to g8 for that matter. He's just going to play rook to h1 and try to collect this guy. And the problem is that black is undeveloped. So these guys are still stuck on the queen side. So he just doesn't have time to kind of get out of the box. So he plays g5. So that way on rook to h1, he can play rook to f6. Although even here he's losing. Let's say check here and rook h to e1. And he's still all bottled up. Rook to e7 followed by rook to b7 is the threat. So this is also winning. But rook to e6 was good enough too. When here, rook h1, rook h8, rook e7 check. And okay, black still has problems. If he goes king to f6, then the rook comes here, threatening to give a quick mate. So let's say g4, trying to give a flight square, check here, bishop c2, threatening rook to g6 mate, and if this, then rook to f7, with the idea of rook to f5 mate. So it's really very nice, and again, all of this works because black is playing without the second rook. When you put the knight on a6, then black has rook a to f8 and avoids the immediate disaster. Although he's actually still in huge trouble. Sorry, that doesn't even avoid the mate because there's rook to e5 mate too. So, okay, it's even worse than I was initially suspecting for black. I mean, he's totally dead even if you give him knight to a6 and another move after that. So that doesn't work for black. So instead of king to f6, he tried king to g6, but no dice here either. Bishop c2, king f6, rook h to e1, threatening rook 1 to e6 mate. So again, it's very similar. Black plays g4 to give his king the g5 square, but check here, rook e5 check, and the game actually finished in mate. So that was it. So great game by the young Russian. I guess he's not that young anymore. He's 27, I think, now. But still relatively young. And a great game by him. So really beautiful preparation. And, even if the computer found a lot of this, no doubt with some of his prodding and assistance, it's still a fine bit of analysis. Li Chao has a computer too. Lots of people have computers, but Nepo's the guy who found it. And, again, really a beautiful idea. I mean, it doesn't look like there should be anything there. So, this is really a fine achievement on his part. And, he may well have had to find quite a number of the moves over the board as well. So, great game. And, again, it shows that there are riches still to be found and enjoyed, even in long-running, often overly maligned openings like the Petroff Defense. So, I hope you guys enjoyed this. And if you don't like the Petroff, then this should warm your heart as well, seeing it get abused in this rather harsh way. So, That's it for this game. Until next time, this is FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos signing off for ChessLecture.com. Bye-bye.